She caught her billionaire CEO husband cheating with her best friend, minutes before her baby shower. So, this is why you didn't offer to plan the baby shower. So I'd be too busy to notice you fucking the father of my children? Savina, wait, it's not, don't Savina me. You had my back since college, Monet. Now you've got my husband on yours? Babe, I can explain. Don't you dare call me babe while your shirt's still open from screwing my best friend. It was a mistake. No. A mistake is spilling wine on a rug. This is destruction, and you two lit the match together. She walked out, but not before turning back and saying, I hope she fakes her moans better than she fakes friendship. Have you ever had to smile in a room full of people while your soul was on fire? Have you ever been betrayed by not just a partner, but a friend who knew your every secret? If it happened minutes before one of the biggest moments of your life, what would you say, and what would you do? Stay to the end of this story to see what happens when a woman who's 7 months pregnant with twins decides not to crumble, but to rise. Comment where in the world you are watching from, or just say I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that burn before they heal. Let's begin. Savina Holt stood in the center of her kitchen, one hand resting on her 8-month belly, the other swirling lemon in a glass of water. The Chicago skyline filtered light through the tall windows of her penthouse. Her robe, pearl-hued and soft as breath, swayed as she moved from counter to sofa and back again. Today wasn't supposed to be dramatic. It was supposed to be full of joy. 7 weeks from delivery, 40 minutes until guests, and already her twins were practicing choreography inside her. 2 boys, 2 heartbeats, moving in unison to the jazz humming from the Sonos speaker near the orchid shelf. She smiled at the thought of Darian. He'd been gone since morning, left early to finalize something at Holt Tower, her assistant said. Still, he'd kissed her on the forehead before leaving, left a note, even made her a pitcher of lemon water, chilled with cucumber slices. How thoughtful. Until her phone buzzed. A message from Daniela, her event planner. Caterers stuck on Lakeshore Drive, delayed by 10, still setting up. Savina replied with a thumbs up and eased into a dining chair, one hand cradling the underside of her belly. And then it came. Not a pain, not a contraction, a chill. Somewhere beneath her ribcage, something whispered, no. Her eyes flicked to the living room, florals perfectly placed, gift table, already filling, pastel balloons softly bobbing near the ceiling fan. Everything was going according to plan, but her body didn't believe it. Savina reached for her phone again, not sure why. She opened the Find My app, not out of suspicion, just instinct. She had Darian's location synced. Always had. They rarely used it unless one of them forgot where the car was parked or needed to check airport timing. She tapped his name. Darian Holt, nearby. But not at Holt Tower. Not at the Four Seasons Lounge. Not at any of the usual places he worked deals or took high-profile calls. The blue dot pulsed quietly. Just 3 blocks away. And the address was familiar. Monet Brielle. Her best friend of 12 years, maid of honor, godmother to her unborn sons, the woman who helped pick out the crib, the one who swore off men to focus on healing and hot yoga. Savina's breath stalled. Not panic, not disbelief. Something colder, quieter. Confirmation. She didn't scream, didn't call, didn't text Darian. Instead, she stood, changed slowly into a soft white maternity dress, simple and untied at the waist, slipped on flat shoes, applied a nude gloss, tied her curls up with a silk scarf. She told no one where she was going. The driver opened the car door, eyes warm with familiarity. "Good morning, Mrs. Holt," he said. She offered a polite nod. 22nd floor, Halstead and Loomis. He asked nothing else. The ride was short, the music in the car low. She stared out the window as old trees lined the road like witnesses. Each block closed in like a memory. 3 blocks, 12 years of friendship, 8 years of marriage, 2 babies in her womb. The elevator was quiet. She stepped out on the 22nd floor. Her palms grazed the cool wall beside Monet's door. She raised one hand and knocked, softly, almost too softly. No answer. She pushed. The door wasn't locked. It opened with a sigh. The scent hit her first. Candle wax, sweat, faint perfume. Her pulse flickered. Inside, a silk robe was tossed on the floor. Champagne flutes half empty. Soft music played, a sensual playlist she once shared with Monet on a girls' night in. Her husband's suit jacket was thrown over a chair. And then, there he was, Darian, shirt half open, lips red and swollen, and behind him, Monet, wrapped in a towel, damp hair clinging to her shoulders, skin flushed. They froze, all three. No one called her name. No one rushed forward. No one offered a lie. Savina stared. Then, she turned. No tears, no sound, no scene. She walked back into the elevator, back into the car. The driver didn't ask a thing. Neither did she. The moment her body touched the leather seat, the twins kicked again. Hard, not in pain, in protest, as if they felt everything she wouldn't let herself feel. She rubbed her belly slowly, whispering under her breath, I know, my loves." She didn't cry. Not yet. There would be time for that. But not today. Today, they had a party to host. The penthouse was a theatre of calm. By the time Savina returned, the caterer had arrived. Soft jazz was back on the speakers, and Daniela had lit every candle with the precision of a prayer. The gift table glowed under pastel streamers. Personalized cupcakes lined the marble counter, each one topped with tiny fondant baby shoes in blue and silver. Savina walked in like nothing had happened. She touched up her lip gloss in the entry mirror, smoothed down her dress, and slid on a pair of pearl studs. The same ones she wore at her wedding. The same pearls Monet had gifted her during her first trimester. She didn't take them off. Not for symbolism, but because she refused to let two broken people ruin things she still loved. She moved with grace, nodded at the staff, thanked Daniela, checked on the baby photo wall display. Everything was perfect, except for the crack that no one could see. A deep, invisible fracture between what had been true this morning and what she now carried alongside her babies. She didn't tell anyone, not yet. She wanted them to see her first, all of her, radiant, centered, hosting her own baby shower like a woman who was not just about to give birth, but about to be reborn. Guests began arriving. Laughter filled the air. Hug after hug. Compliments. Praise. Everything she had dreamed. And yet, somewhere in the swirl of roses and tulle, her mind clocked the time. Darian wasn't here yet. He was late. She expected that. At exactly 2:17 p.m., the elevator dinged, and there he was, Darian Holt, in a navy suit and a lie behind his smile. He walked toward her like nothing was broken, kissed her cheek like nothing was missing. "Sorry, baby," he murmured low, hand on her lower back. Meeting ran long. She didn't flinch. She just smiled and kissed his cheek back, right in front of everyone. Women looked on in admiration. Men gave quiet nods. But Daniela, the planner, caught something in Savina's eyes. A flicker. Something measured. Darian placed his hand on her belly, posed for photos, whispered jokes into her ear like they were still the dream couple from the Forbes feature last spring. Savina raised her glass. "Thank you all for coming," she said, voice poised. "Today, I celebrate more than motherhood. I celebrate clarity." A hush fell over the room for just 1 second too long. Then, applause. Clinks of champagne flutes. But Darian, his smile didn't fully return. He looked at her like he'd heard something no one else did. She turned away from him to greet a guest. He stayed behind, his hand falling from her belly as if he'd lost permission to touch her. Savina took a deep breath and floated back into the crowd, back into the center of the celebration. Then Monet walked in, late, dressed in lavender. Savina's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't move. She watched as Monet hugged guests, offered smiles, and pretended her skin didn't still smell like betrayal. She approached Savina. "Hey, Mama," Monet said lightly. "You look stunning." Savina smiled, lifting her glass. "Lavender, Monet. Brave choice." A few nearby guests chuckled, not quite knowing why. But Monet's face flushed. Her smile cracked. Savina turned away before a response could form, letting her silence do the damage. The room didn't erupt. It simmered, just enough for Monet to feel it. Darian caught the moment too. He coughed lightly, excused himself, and stepped into the hallway like the air had changed. It had. Savina didn't follow. She stayed exactly where she was. Because today, this was her moment, not theirs. The camera flashes didn't capture the betrayal. They captured her glow, her elegance, her composure. She posed for every picture like a woman who knew exactly what had happened and exactly what she was going to do next. Later, as guests moved from drinks to dessert, Savina slipped away into the nursery. She needed 1 minute. Just one. She picked up a folded onesie with little legend embroidered across the chest and held it to her face. Her breath shook. She gripped the crib rail, squeezing until her knuckles went white. Still no tears. Just the ache, the silence, the raw, bloodless wound of betrayal cuts without warning. Behind her, the party carried on. But inside that nursery, a mother was deciding how to protect her future and how to bury her past. She placed the onesie back in the drawer, smoothed out her dress, straightened her shoulders, and walked back out, ready to smile again. The sun had shifted behind the skyline, casting longer light through the penthouse windows. Inside, the baby shower had bloomed into its full rhythm. Plates filled with hors d'oeuvres, mocktails passed around, and the laughter of women who didn't know a single truth about the woman they were there to celebrate. Savina stood in the center of it all, effortlessly moving from conversation to conversation. She wore peace like perfume, carried herself like no one had touched her world just hours ago. No one asked where she had been earlier. No one noticed how tightly she gripped the stem of her glass when Darian entered the room again. He had stepped out earlier, likely to breathe, or to beg God for a do-over. He lingered near the back now, drink in hand, eyes scanning her like he still couldn't figure out what she knew. She hadn't told him she saw, not in words. She hadn't screamed, hadn't thrown anything. But something in her calm had started to suffocate him. Savina let him sweat. Darian always believed his power came from silence. Today, she'd weaponized hers. When the music dimmed and Daniela tapped the glass for toasts, all eyes turned to her. Savina lifted her glass slowly, eyes gleaming under the soft gold of the chandelier. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice clear but low, "to celebrate this new chapter." Polite applause followed, but her next words cut the room into halves. "Today, I celebrate more than motherhood. I celebrate clarity." The laughter paused. Even the music felt quieter. "Clarity," she repeated, letting the word settle. "Because sometimes life doesn't give you warning signs, it gives you open doors." She sipped. Only Daniela, standing by the dessert table, understood what was really being said. Darian shifted his weight. His lips pressed tight. Monet, across the room, adjusted her sleeves. Savina smiled sweetly at the guests. "I've learned that love isn't proven by longevity, but by presence. And some things, even when broken, don't deserve to be repaired." A quiet gasp came from someone in the corner. No one knew what to say. And that was the power of it. She didn't name names, didn't explain anything. She simply offered a knowing glance across the room, took another sip, and said, "Now, let's open some gifts before I go into labor right here." The tension cracked like a shell. Laughter returned. The spotlight moved. Everyone pretended to move on, but Monet didn't laugh. And Darian? He disappeared again, this time without a word. Savina didn't ask where he went. She moved to the gift table, unwrapped onesies and bibs, smiled at each card, and whispered, "Thank yous," with such warmth, no one could tell she was unraveling under it all. Even Monet approached again. Want help packing things later? She asked. Savina didn't look at her, just reached for another ribbon. You've helped enough. Her voice was almost gentle. Monet blinked, and Savina kept unwrapping. No rage, no scene, just exile. One cold sentence at a time. Later that evening, when the last guest hugged her goodbye and the candles burned lower, Savina finally sat down. Alone. The penthouse was quiet. The air smelled of peonies and powdered sugar. She looked at the framed ultrasound photo on the mantel, her twins side by side, and for the first time that day, her shoulders dropped. Not from defeat, from decision. She would leave. Not in panic, not in drama, but in the same grace she stood in today. Everything that made this house feel like home could be taken elsewhere. Her peace wasn't rooted in these walls. It was in her. She stood, walked toward the nursery, and paused in the doorway. 2 tiny cribs waited. 2 tiny boys. 2 reasons to never let betrayal write the rest of her story. She whispered one sentence to herself before turning off the light. They will never grow up watching me shrink. The penthouse was still. Guests were gone. Champagne glasses rinsed and stacked. The light floral scent had thinned into something more neutral, air and silence. Savina sat in the nursery, alone. Her bare feet curled against the thick rug. The chair beneath her creaked softly as she leaned forward, folding a muslin cloth with slow, careful fingers. She folded it again, then again. Her body ached from standing, but her spirit had never felt steadier. There was a power in not reacting. There was clarity in control. She looked at the baby monitor camera already mounted above the crib and imagined what those little boys would one day see when they reviewed footage from their earliest days. They'd see a woman who didn't break, even when breaking would have been easier. She traced the edge of a tiny onesie on her lap, blue and soft and still tagged. Behind her, the front door opened. Darian. She didn't move. She waited. Footsteps. Slow. Hesitant. He was probably surprised the lights were still on, surprised the apartment hadn't exploded into fire or accusations, surprised he still had a key that worked. He paused in the hallway. She heard him set his keys down, same place as always. Then nothing for a moment. Then his voice. Savina. She didn't look up. He moved closer. His shoes tapped quietly across the hardwood, then hushed when he stepped onto the nursery rug. I just wanted to check on you. You looked tired earlier. Still, she didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She knew that voice. That cowardice. He didn't know what version of her he'd come home to, and that alone made her more powerful than anything she could have screamed. I'm fine, she said, simply. He exhaled a little, then stepped closer. About earlier, don't. His mouth shut. She stood slowly, onesie still in hand, and placed it into the dresser drawer. When she turned to face him, she did it with the same stillness she carried all day. I don't need a summary, or a breakdown, or a lie wrapped in guilt. Darian's jaw tightened. It's not like that. Her eyebrow rose. It's exactly like that. He stepped forward, hands out slightly. Savina, please. We've been off for months. You know that. We haven't touched each other in weeks. You don't even look at me. And that gave you permission? She said, voice even. Because I was carrying your children and didn't have time to stroke your ego between appointments. His mouth opened, then closed. She stepped closer. You know what's wild, Darian? I felt you slipping. I did. I thought it was work. I thought maybe you were scared. But you weren't scared of becoming a father again. You were scared of not being the center of attention. That's not true, he murmured. Then what was it? She asked, folding her arms. Her body? Her freedom? Or just the fact that she looked at you like you still mattered? Darian's throat moved as he swallowed. It was a mistake. She laughed once, dry and cold. No, a mistake is forgetting to take the trash out. This was intentional, repeated, cowardly. His hands dropped to his sides. I didn't mean to hurt you, but you did. He tried again. Savina. You slept with the one person who knew every version of me, she said, quieter now. You let her touch you, knowing she picked out my baby shower theme. I didn't plan it, he said, desperation creeping in. You showed up late to my baby shower with her skin still on you. His face crumpled. Please. I don't need your apology, she cut in. I need you to listen. I need you to understand that you don't get to cry about the boat you set on fire. He looked at her like she had slapped him, but she hadn't raised her voice. She didn't have to. He stepped forward again, this time slower, softer. His eyes flicked to her belly. The boys kicked again, hard. He reached a hand toward her stomach. She stepped back. His hand froze mid-air. You lost this right, she whispered. He let his arm fall. I miss you, he said. She looked at him, finally, directly. Then you should have thought about that before crawling into bed with the woman who promised to throw me my dream shower. He had no words, only guilt, only shame. And even that felt like a performance. She moved past him, toward the door, and stopped in the hallway. Thank you for coming, she said. Then she disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door behind her like a ceremony. Not slamming it, just closing a chapter. Savina didn't sleep. She lay in bed, one hand on her stomach, feeling every little shift the boys made. Their rhythm was different tonight, restless, almost protective, like they knew something had changed, like they were awake with her. The hallway light leaked beneath the bedroom door, a line of soft gold that refused to fade. She stared at it, wide-eyed, unmoved. Her body was still, but her mind ran miles ahead. Darian hadn't left. She knew he was still in the penthouse, somewhere between the kitchen and the guest room, probably pacing like he expected redemption to show up if he waited long enough. Just after 2 a.m., her door creaked open. She didn't move. He stepped inside slowly. Can I sit? He asked. She didn't answer. He sat anyway. The moonlight painted part of his face. He looked tired, older, like regret had settled on his skin. I didn't sleep, he said softly. You will, she replied. Eventually, he sighed. I need you to know I didn't mean for this to happen. That line again. He blinked. What? You keep saying it, she said, turning her head toward him. Like you tripped, like her legs just opened and you fell. I was weak. No, she said sharply. You were selfish. He looked away. She pushed herself upright against the headboard. Do you know what it's like to carry 2 lives inside you while the man you built a life with sneaks off to warm himself in someone else's arms? He looked back at her. We were drifting. No, she said. We weren't drifting. You were drifting. I was nesting. I was preparing. I was holding up the roof while you lit matches under the floorboards. I felt alone. You felt ignored, she corrected. Because for once, someone else needed me more than you did. He opened his mouth but closed it again. She shook her head. You're not a victim here. I know that. No, you don't, she replied, voice calm but steady. Because you came here thinking you deserved space to explain. You don't. He rubbed his face with both hands, frustrated. I came here because I miss what we had. Then you should have protected it, she said. I made a mistake. You made a choice, she corrected. Again and again, he stared at her. She didn't blink. I didn't come here to fight. Neither did I, she said. But you started a war. He swallowed. I'm sorry. She nodded once. Okay. That's all you're going to say? What else do you want? She asked. For me to cry? Beg you to stay? Tell you how deep it cut? I'm not doing that. His voice cracked. I just want a chance. She stared at him, unmoved. You don't get to cry about the house you burned down. Silence stretched between them. You chose Monet, she added, and that's fine. But now you live with that. I didn't choose her. You didn't stop her. Darian stood, slowly, as if the weight of his mistake finally landed on him. Savina shifted again, laying back with effort, her hand returning to her belly. I don't need anything from you right now, she said quietly. Not pity, not guilt, not explanations, just peace. He looked down at her. Do you still love me? She closed her eyes, then whispered, not enough to shrink for you anymore. That silence hit harder than anything she'd said before. He lingered for a moment longer, then walked out. The door closed softly. She opened her eyes again to the darkness, and for the first time since walking into Monet's apartment, she exhaled. The morning light crept in, slow and golden. Savina sat in the nursery again, her legs folded beneath her, a warm blanket draped across her lap. She sipped warm ginger tea from her favorite glass mug, one hand resting on her stomach as the boys shifted gently beneath her skin. She had slept for barely 3 hours, but her soul felt rested. She heard movement outside, Darian pacing, the kitchen faucet running, then stopping. The silence after was heavier than the footsteps. He knocked once on the nursery door. She didn't answer. He opened it anyway. She didn't look up. He stood there quietly for a second, then took 2 steps inside. I'm leaving for the office, he said. Still, she said nothing. I'll be at the board meeting most of the day, and there's a dinner after. Just wanted you to know. Noted, she murmured. He nodded slowly, then walked closer. The closer he came, the more deliberate her stillness became. He crouched in front of her. Not too close, but close enough to feel the heat from her skin. I was thinking, he said softly, maybe we should talk again tonight. After I get back. She looked at him for the first time that morning. There's nothing new you'll say at 10 p.m. that you didn't fail to say at 10 a.m. yesterday, she replied. He shifted his weight. His hands fidgeted. I just want to work through this. If we can. Savina raised an eyebrow. We. Darian didn't respond. She tilted her head slightly. You think this is fixable? I want to believe it is, he whispered. She let out a breath, not a sigh, not exasperation, a release. I don't, she said. He swallowed hard. You've always had a way with words, he said quietly, and you've always used silence as a shield. He nodded slowly. Maybe, no maybe, she said, eyes steady. You didn't just cheat, you abandoned me, emotionally, mentally, then physically. I know. You say that, she replied, but you keep showing up like you still have rights here. He looked wounded, but she wasn't finished. You don't get to place your hand on my belly and pretend it means something after placing your body in her bed. That stopped him, flat and clean. He looked down, then reached toward her, just slightly, fingers brushing toward her stomach. She shifted, pulled her blanket up over her belly. He paused. You lost this right, she said, voice soft but sharp. He dropped his hand. I didn't mean to. But you did, she cut in. You meant to enjoy her body. You meant to cover your tracks. You meant to show up here and smile for pictures like nothing happened. Darian closed his eyes for a beat. When he opened them again, she was already rising to her feet, slow but certain. She moved past him. He didn't follow. She stood in the doorway of the nursery, hand resting on the frame. When these boys are born, she said, they will know I carried them through betrayal, not with bitterness, but with boundaries. He looked up. I'll be a good father, he offered. She nodded. Then start by being a better man. And don't confuse showing up late with showing up fully. Her words hung in the air. Darian stayed kneeling in that room, surrounded by baby bottles and folded blankets. And, Savina? She walked away, not because she was done hurting, but because she was done giving more of herself to someone who couldn't hold what he was given. The first thing Savina packed was the framed ultrasound photo. She didn't need to. It would have been easier to leave it, have a copy printed later, pretend it wasn't the only item she paused to touch twice. But she wrapped it in tissue herself, slid it carefully between the folds of a baby blanket, and placed it at the top of the box labeled Nursery, Priority. The moving team arrived just after 7 a.m. 3 men, uniformed, professional, paid in advance, no names needed. They were instructed not to speak unless spoken to, not to label anything she didn't touch herself, not to leave even a fingerprint on Darian's things. She'd already made sure of that. Savina stood in the center of the living room as they worked. No music, no distractions, just the rhythmic tape stretch and shuffle of boxes sealing chapters shut. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She just moved, room by room, drawer by drawer, like she had done it 100 times in her head already. There was no note left behind, no symbolic gesture. She wasn't staging a moment. She was escaping a memory. Her wardrobe was already halved, her closet already thinned out, jewelry cleaned and packed in velvet rolls. Every drawer she opened was one more quiet goodbye to the woman who had once imagined raising a family here. At 8:12 a.m., she paused by the window. Rain had started, light at first, then heavier. The skyline disappeared behind fog. Cars below moved slower, like even the city was holding its breath. She picked up her phone, blocked Darian's number. Not out of anger, out of necessity. She didn't want to risk explaining something that no longer required explanation. She told him with her silence, with her restraint, with her refusal to scream. At 8:24 a.m., she stood at the front door. The hallway behind her echoed empty. She turned to look one last time, not at the walls, not at the floors, but at what didn't live there anymore. Trust, laughter, belonging. Then she stepped out, the elevator closing behind her with a whisper. Downstairs, the driver waited. Not the usual one, a new one. Private, discreet. He opened the back door without a word. Savina slid in, placed her hands on her belly, and stared out the window as the skyline blurred behind glass. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Not even Daniela. Not her mother. Not the press. And especially not Monet. Because people like Monet fed off the story. Savina had no story for her, only distance. She arrived at the estate by noon, an hour north of the city, secluded, quiet, untouched by scandal or betrayal. It belonged to her, acquired privately under a holding name months ago as an investment. Funny how women prepare for things before they admit they're preparing. The staff had set everything up as requested. Minimal furniture, cribs delivered, white linens, no framed wedding photos, no traces of Darian. The nursery had already been painted soft grey. Twin mobiles spun slowly above the cribs, each adorned with clouds and stars. She walked through the rooms like she'd always lived there. She took off her shoes by the door, slipped into house socks, pulled her curls into a bun, then stood barefoot in the hallway, looking at her reflection in the floor-length mirror. She looked like herself again. Not the woman in the magazine spreads, not the one who smiled through the betrayal. Just Savina. Full, focused, free. In the kitchen, she made chamomile tea. No lemon, no garnish, just warmth. As she sat at the island, her phone buzzed once. A text, unknown number. Where are you? No name. She didn't need one. She deleted it, then turned the phone off completely. Because where she was finally hers, and who she was becoming. Didn't owe anyone a forwarding address. The rain started again just after midnight. Not soft this time. Thick, slanted, and wild. The kind that rattled window panes and turned sky into a strobe of electricity. Savina was on the couch when it began, wrapped in a cotton robe, a bowl of cut. Fruit beside her, the soft hum of a nature documentary filling the silence. She wasn't watching. Her fingers moved in slow circles across her belly, one on each side, tracing the outline of her sons. The kicks had become stronger, lower, more deliberate. She breathed through them, pressing her back deeper into the cushions, as another wave of tightness gripped her from the inside. She knew. It wasn't practice anymore. It was time. She stood slowly, grounding herself. No panic, no phone call, no rushing to the hospital. She had planned for this, not because she wanted to do it alone, but because she refused to let someone's absence define her readiness. Upstairs, the nursery lights glowed soft yellow. The cribs stood waiting, side by side. The bags were packed. The car was fueled. The midwife already on call and headed her way. Everything had been arranged 3 weeks ago, not because she expected betrayal, but because she knew not every man meant forever when he said it, and she wasn't risking her son's arrival on someone else's failure to show up. Another contraction rolled through. She grabbed the stair rail and closed her eyes, breathing out slow and long. Rain slammed harder outside. The house flashed with every bolt of lightning. Thunder cracked like warning shots. But Savina never flinched. In the mirror near the staircase, she saw her reflection. Barefoot. Alone. Powerful. At 12:47 a.m., the midwife arrived. Savina met her at the door, towel in hand, her forehead slightly damp but calm. "You waited," the midwife said gently. "I had to be sure," Savina replied. They moved through the kitchen, past the warm teapot, toward the bedroom she had prepped for labor. The air smelled faintly of lavender and vanilla. The room was dim, the bed covered in soft linens, the nightstand stacked with baby clothes and warm towels. Savina lay down as the midwife checked her. "Almost there," she said. "Your body knows what it's doing." "I trust it," Savina said quietly. The thunder cracked again. She smiled. "I trust them too," she added, placing a hand on her belly. The next hour was a storm. Inside and out. Waves of pain crested through her, hips trembling, thighs locked, fingers gripped in sheets and silence. No epidural, no panic, just breath, just focus, just will. The midwife guided her calmly. "You're doing beautifully, Savina." But Savina wasn't listening to words. She was listening to her body. The boys were coming. One push, another. A scream she didn't stifle, but didn't let own her. She felt the first one slide free. A cry, high and sharp. The midwife caught him and placed him on Savina's chest. She kissed his forehead without speaking, then braced again. The second followed quickly. Lower cry. Same lungs. Same fight. She didn't cry. Not until both were on her chest, slick and small and alive. That's when her lip trembled. When her body shook. Not from pain but from release. From knowing they had come through it together. Through betrayal. Through solitude. Through a storm. Zaire. Zayden. She whispered their names against their foreheads like vows. And they quieted, wrapped into her. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, Savina felt warmth from the inside out. She had done it. Alone, but not lonely. Never lonely again. The moon was high when Zayden cried. It started as a whimper, then bloomed into a sharp, urgent wail. Savina sat up immediately, heartbeat quickening before her feet even touched the floor. Her robe slipped from her shoulder as she moved across the room, guided by instinct and the faint light of the baby monitor. She reached the crib, gently lifting her son into her arms. His skin was warm, warmer than usual, too warm. She pressed her cheek to his forehead, then checked again. A low-grade fever. She didn't panic. She didn't Google. She held him, close, skin to skin, his breath against her collarbone. Zaire stirred too, but didn't cry. He simply twisted beneath his blanket, seeking warmth he no longer needed the way his brother did. Savina carried Zayden to the nursery chair. She sat slowly, adjusting her robe, letting him settle against her chest. His cries softened, then stilled. Only the sound of rain tapping against the windows kept rhythm with her pulse. She whispered his name, over and over, not as comfort, as commitment. "I've got you," she said softly. "Even when no one else shows up, I will." His fingers curled into the fabric of her robe, the way Darian's never did. Savina rocked him slowly. The heat of his body against hers forced her to focus. There was no backup plan, no shared responsibility, no text message to send, just her, and that was enough. She watched the shadows shift across the walls. Zaire let out a soft grunt from his crib. She smiled at the sound, then kissed the top of Zayden's head. Not because it was cute, but because it reminded her she was still capable of giving love that wasn't tainted by betrayal. Hours passed. The fever didn't rise. She didn't sleep. She rocked him through the early dawn, her body weary but alert. At some point, She loosened her robe. Zayden snuggled deeper against her chest. The window cracked open slightly now, letting in cool air. Her skin shivered, but her heart stayed steady. She wasn't angry anymore. Not in this moment. She was just present. She looked down at her son's face, peaceful despite the warmth in his body. And suddenly, she wept. Not loud, not shaking, just soft streams falling down her cheeks. Not for Darian, not even for Monet, but for herself. The version of her that once thought love had to come from someone else to be real. This was real. This was enough. This was hers. Zayden stirred, and her tears stopped. She shifted him gently, holding him with more purpose. And in that moonlit room, her feet bare, her robe loose, her hair undone, she knew she had more love in her body than pain. And that would always be true, even on nights like this, especially on nights like this. The estate had quiet corners. Savina had come to appreciate them. The eastern side of the property caught morning light, and that's where she often sat with the twins, just beyond the French doors, near the garden path where ivy crept up the side wall like a silent witness. It was there she first heard him. Not speaking, working, the tap of metal against wood, the soft drag of boots against stone, the measured rhythm of someone building something with intention. She didn't get up right away. She stayed seated on the garden bench, Zaire in one arm, Zayden asleep against her chest, their breaths matching hers. Eventually she looked. He was at the far end of the lawn, crouched near the edge of the house, measuring tape clipped to his belt, pencil behind his ear. He didn't glance toward her once. Just measured, noted, moved again. His hair was short, with streaks of salt at the temples. His beard was cinnamon dark, trimmed close to the jaw. He wore dark jeans, a grey Henley rolled at the sleeves and focused like armor. She watched him for a moment longer, then returned her attention to her sons. Later that afternoon, they met face to face. She was in the kitchen, barefoot, wiping down the marble island when the bell rang. He stood at the threshold, clipboard in hand. "Elias Monroe," he said. His voice was even, grounded. She nodded once. Savina Holt. He glanced at the babies, both now asleep in their twin carriers near the dining table. "Wasn't sure if I'd be interrupting. You're not?" He stepped inside. "Contractor said you requested a wall expansion in the nursery." "I did," she replied, drying her hands. "I want them to have more room to grow." That made him look up, right at her, not the kind of look that scanned or lingered. Just saw. He nodded. "I'll walk the blueprint," he said, lifting his clipboard. She moved to the side and let him pass. No comment on the decor, no flattery, no unnecessary chatter. He walked the room slowly, made notes, crouched down once to check the baseboard spacing. "You've got good bones in here," he said, almost to himself. "Let's keep them," she replied. He glanced over his shoulder. That time, he smiled. Fair enough. The visit was quick. He gave a short rundown of possibilities, pointed out what could be done without compromising structural integrity, and didn't once try to over-explain. She appreciated that. When he left, she stood in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary, watching him walk back to his truck. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. The next day, she heard the hammer. Early, distant, then closer. The kind of sound that echoed through the morning stillness, but didn't disturb it. Zayden cooed from the baby lounger. Zaire gnawed on a teething ring, drool soaking through his onesie. Savina just smiled. She could feel it already. The walls were moving, not just the ones in the nursery, but the ones around her too. The sky darkened faster than expected. By mid-afternoon, the clouds had thickened into heavy folds, hanging low over the estate like they were deciding whether to break. The wind whispered first, then groaned, then howled. Savina stood by the window, holding Zaire, while Zayden napped in the bassinet nearby. Her eyes drifted to the far end of the garden, where a familiar figure moved across the gravel path. Elias. No clipboard today. just tools in hand and calm in his stride. He wore a charcoal jacket now, flecks of sawdust clinging to the sleeves. His boots were muddied, his hair slightly damp. Still, he didn't rush. He was just finishing work when the first crack of thunder split the sky. Savina flinched. Zaire did too. The rain followed hard, fast. Elias looked up briefly, then jogged to the covered side patio, taking shelter under the overhang just outside the glass door. Savina watched him. He stood there for a beat, then saw her watching. Neither of them moved. Then, slowly, she reached for the handle and slid the door open. "You can come in if you want," she said. He hesitated. "You sure?" "Unless you prefer standing in thunder." He smiled at that. "Only when it's quieter than the inside of a house." Savina stepped back. He entered. The scent of rain followed him, that and something warmer, like cedar and fresh-cut pine. He wiped his boots on the rug by the door. She motioned toward the kitchen. "Tea?" "Depends. On what? Do you mean it this time?" That made her pause. He stepped closer. "Last week, you offered, then didn't look up when I declined." She smirked faintly. "Then this time, I mean it." He nodded once. "Then I'll take it." She moved toward the stove, her robe flowing behind her, the baby still in one arm, balanced like second nature. Elias watched her, quietly, respectfully. "You okay holding him?" she asked. He blinked. "Me." She extended Zaire gently. "Let's find out." He took the boy carefully, held him like he'd done it before. "You've done this?" she asked, opening a tea canister. "4 nieces," he replied. 2 nephews. "No kids of your own?" "Not yet." She poured the water. "Is that a someday answer or a never?" "A someday. Hopefully." The kettle began to hum. Savina handed him a burp cloth. "You're good at this," she said, nodding to how naturally Zaire had curled into his chest. "I just pay attention," he replied. She turned toward him slowly. "That's rare." "I know." The rain pounded harder now. Thunder cracked again, closer. Zayden stirred in the bassinet. Elias gently rocked Zaire with one hand. Savina watched him from the kitchen. 2 mugs on the counter, steam rising. And for the first time since she moved into the estate, she didn't feel alone. He looked up. "Do you ever sit?" he asked. "Rarely." "Try it." She did. Across from him, tea in hand, silence between them. But it wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with things not yet said, and safe, because neither of them tried to force it. They sipped, watched the storm, listened to the babies breathe, and somewhere inside all that quiet, something began to shift, not loudly, but permanently. The storm moved from chaos to rhythm. Rain tapped steady against the windows now, no longer wild, just insistent. Savina leaned back slightly in her chair, the tea warm between her hands. Zayden had stirred once, then settled. Zaire was still tucked against Elias's chest, cheek pressed into his shirt, tiny hand clutching the seam. Neither adult spoke for several minutes. They just breathed in the quiet. Savina studied Elias from across the table, his stillness, the way he adjusted, his hold without looking down, the way he didn't shrink in silence. She wasn't used to that. Men like Darian filled space with dominance. Elias filled it with presence. "You don't ask a lot of questions," she said softly. He looked up. "Should I? Most men do." "I'm not most." "No," she agreed. "You're not." He didn't grin, didn't smirk. He just looked at her, direct and calm. Then his gaze dropped to her left wrist. It was subtle, but she saw it. The small scar there, the one from a night long ago when she'd slipped in a bathroom, dizzy from dehydration during her first pregnancy scare. She didn't flinch. He didn't ask. His eyes returned to hers. That quiet recognition did something to her. Something small, but deep. She shifted slightly in her chair. The hem of her robe slid upward, revealing a stretch of her thigh. It wasn't intentional, but she didn't fix it either. Elias noticed. She knew he did. He glanced once, quick, controlled, but his breath caught just enough to answer a question she hadn't asked. Zaire let out a soft hiccup. Elias shifted him slightly, cradling him against his shoulder now. "You ever wonder," he asked, "if storms show up just to help us hear ourselves again?" Savina tilted her head. "Or maybe they show up when silence becomes too comfortable." He smiled faintly. "Comfort can be dangerous too. Not this kind," she said. His eyes rested on her again. There was something there now, something just beneath the surface. Not flirtation, not performance, something warmer, want, the kind born not just from attraction, but from noticing, understanding, recognition. She stood slowly, gathering the empty mugs. "You want more tea?" she asked, voice soft. "Only if you sit again after." That made her pause. She didn't respond right away, but she didn't say no either. As she poured the second round, the smell of rain filtered in through the slightly open window near the sink. It blended with cinnamon, bergamot, and something distinctly masculine that still lingered where Elias sat. She brought the mugs back. This time, when she sat, it was closer, not across from him, but beside. Zaire stirred again, and Elias stood slowly. She held out her arms. He passed the baby to her, careful, gentle. Their hands brushed. Fingers paused. No apology, no retreat. She cradled Zaire close, then leaned into the cushions beside him. They sipped their tea in sync. His shoulder grazed hers when he shifted. She didn't move away. He glanced down, catching a glimpse of the scar beneath her collarbone. Another one Darian never noticed, but Elias didn't ask. Again, he just offered warmth without words. The storm outside was quieter now, but inside, something had begun, not loudly, not abruptly, but undeniably. Savina looked over at him, just as he looked at her, and for a heartbeat too long, neither looked away. The rain had returned, not like before. This time, it was soft, rhythmic, like the sky had nothing left to scream and had finally chosen to whisper. Savina stood barefoot in the hallway, one hand on the edge of the doorframe, the other smoothing down the fabric of her slate-grey robe. Her curls hung loose over her shoulders, damp at the ends from her earlier bath. The boys were asleep, the house still. She didn't hear a knock. She didn't need to. She opened the door just as Elias was raising his hand toward it. They froze. He was soaked from the walk up the stone path, his jacket dark with rain, his hair slicked back. In his left hand was a folded blueprint. In his right, nothing but restraint. "I didn't mean to come this late," he said. "You're not late," she replied. He hesitated. The light was on. "I left it for you." Neither of them moved for a long second. Then she stepped back, holding the door open just enough. "You want to come in?" she asked. He nodded once, but didn't move right away. "Savina." She looked up. "If you don't want this," he said, voice low, "say so now." That line didn't hit like a flirtation. It landed like respect. She exhaled. "I would have locked the door if I didn't." That was enough. He stepped inside. She closed the door behind him, the soft latch echoing like a sealed promise. Neither of them said anything for a moment. He set the blueprint down on the console table by the wall, wiped his hands on the hem of his shirt, and looked at her, not in hunger, in honesty. She took a slow step toward him. The fabric of her robe shifted. His eyes flicked downward once, then back up, anchored. "I'm not looking for rescue," she said. "I wouldn't dare," he replied. She took another step. The rain ticked louder outside. Inside, only breath. She stopped in front of him, close enough that she could feel the heat still rising off his damp skin. His hand didn't move. Neither did hers, until she reached out and touched the hem of his shirt. He didn't flinch. She looked at him, measured, then whispered, "If you're not sure." He stepped closer, close enough that her breath caught. "I'm sure," he said, then waited. Still, silent, letting her decide the next move. She tilted her head slightly, lifted her hand, placed it over his heart. It beat strong, steady. She left it there, let it speak, and when she finally whispered, "Then stay," it was not a request. It was permission. He nodded, slow, once, and followed her down the hallway without touching her back, without rushing her pace. But when they reached the bedroom door, and she turned to face him again, his hand found her waist. His eyes never left hers, and she didn't look away. Not this time. The door closed softly behind them. Savina stood still, back to Elias, her breath shallow in the quiet of her room. She didn't move to switch on the light. The glow from the hallway was enough. It cast gold shadows across the bed, the wall, the curve of her neck. Elias didn't reach for her. He waited. Her fingers moved first, sliding the knot of her robe loose, letting it fall open just enough to expose the small line beneath her navel. He saw it, didn't stare, didn't ask. He stepped closer, letting his palm rest gently on the small of her back. She inhaled. Her robe slipped from her shoulders, catching at her elbows. She turned to face him, vulnerable, but not weak. Her body had changed, softened in places, strengthened in others, and yet, the way he looked at her, it wasn't hunger, it was reverence. He lifted his hand to her face, fingers grazing her cheek, tracing down, to her jawline, then to the collarbone, pausing just above her heart. "May I?" he asked, voice barely above breath. She nodded. He leaned in. His lips brushed hers, once, then again, slower, deeper. His hands didn't grip. They listened, as if her body had its own language, and he was fluent. She kissed back, letting years of silence fall off her shoulders. No more pretending, no more shrinking. He moved with her like time didn't exist, like this moment was always supposed to happen. When his hands slid to her waist, she didn't tense. When his mouth traveled to the scar just beneath her breast, she didn't flinch. He kissed it like a story, like something sacred. She gasped, not from surprise, from memory. She guided him to the bed without saying a word. He followed, not leading, just present, fully. When his body pressed into hers, she arched, not in pain, not in fear, but in permission. She pulled him closer, hands sliding under his shirt, palms memorizing every line of his back. He undressed slowly, carefully, nothing rushed, nothing assumed. When they came together, it wasn't desperate, it was deliberate, built on everything unspoken. She wrapped around him, head falling back as he moved, their breath sinking, rising, breaking. Her fingers dug into his shoulders. His mouth met her neck, her chest, her ribs, every kiss a promise. He held her like she mattered, not for the night, for the first time in a very long time. She broke apart beneath him, twice, each time whispering his name like prayer. He didn't speak. He watched, listened, moved with her, not against her. And when they finally stilled, her body draped across his, legs tangled, chest heaving. He kissed her forehead. "You taste like war and peace," he murmured against her skin. She smiled, lips still swollen. "I've lived both." The scent of cinnamon hit her first. Savina stirred slowly, the early light of dawn slipping through the sheer curtains. She blinked, adjusting to the quiet hum of the morning. No cries, no thunder, just the distant sound of a pan shifting on a stove. She reached beside her, empty, but warm. She sat up, the sheets still tangled around her legs. Her body ached, but not from strain, from being fully held, from being seen without needing to explain herself. She reached for her robe, tying it gently before padding barefoot toward the kitchen. There he was, Elias, shirtless but calm, focused, moving through her kitchen like it was his. No fumbling, no pretense. One hand flipped French toast in a pan, the other reached for a bottle of syrup he'd already warmed. "You cook?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. He turned, unfazed. "Only for women who make me forget the weather." Savina smiled. Zayden stirred from the bassinet in the corner, just a soft grunt. Zaire slept on, mouth open. "You were up with them?" she asked. Zayden woke once, he said. Wanted to be held. I figured he earned it. Savina crossed the kitchen slowly. Did he cry? No, Elias said. Just needed a chest. I gave him mine. She paused behind him, fingers lightly brushing his lower back. Thank you. He turned to face her. Their eyes met. And in that small pause, where most lovers fill silence with apologies or uncertainty, he did neither. She didn't either. Because this love didn't apologize. It just existed. Simple, unforced, earned. He nodded toward the table. Sit. She did. He plated the toast. Added a side of mango slices she didn't know he'd seen her buy. Poured tea without asking her how she liked it. Everything was noticed. Not flashy, just real. He joined her with his own plate, sat opposite, fork already in hand. No speeches? She teased. No declarations? He added. She shook her head, grinning. Just food. He took a bite. And maybe more later. She raised an eyebrow. More toast, he clarified. She laughed. It was full. Easy. She hadn't laughed like that in months, maybe years. Zaire stirred then, stretching. Elias stood. I've got him. He lifted the baby gently, cradled him with practiced grace, and returned to the table. One arm fed himself. The other held Zaire steady. Savina watched, awed by the ease of it. You've done this before, she said. No, he replied. I just knew I would, someday. She tilted her head. And this doesn't scare you? What? Me, them. All of this. He looked up. No. What scared me was not finding something real before I was too jaded to believe it. She inhaled, felt something break open in her chest, then settle. Soft, strong. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. You're here now, she said. And I'm not going anywhere, he replied. The rain had passed. The light was golden now. She stood, walked to his side, and kissed him once on the temple, slow and sure. This time, there was no thunder, only sunlight. And peace. The car door opened slowly. Savina stepped out, one silver heel touching the pavement first, then the other, her gown cascading behind her like liquid gold. Cameras flashed before anyone even said her name. She didn't smile right away. She didn't need to. Her presence was loud enough. The gala was for a tech non-profit her company had donated to during her maternity leave. Originally, she hadn't planned to attend, but something in her shifted last week. Not out of spite, not revenge. It was time. Time for people to see her, not as the woman who went quiet after a scandal, but as the woman who rewrote her own narrative without permission, without press, without noise. And tonight, she didn't walk in alone. Elias stood beside her, tuxedo crisp, hair neatly brushed back. No need for a spotlight, but still impossible to ignore. His hand rested gently at her back, not possessive, not performative, just there, grounding her. They walked into the ballroom together, the light shimmering off the crystal chandeliers overhead. Every head turned, every whisper started, but Savina didn't flinch. She moved with purpose, as if nothing behind her had broken her, as if everything ahead was already hers. The coordinator approached. Ms. Holt, we weren't sure you'd be attending. Neither was I, she replied. But clarity has good timing. Elias smiled quietly beside her. The photographer raised a camera. Would you two mind? Savina nodded once. They posed. One photo, two angles. She looked into the lens without blinking, and in that frame, no one could see betrayal, only beauty, strength, and someone who had already forgiven herself. Halfway through the evening, they stepped into the main ballroom. The string quartet played low. Champagne was passed. Conversations buzzed. That's when she saw him. Darian. Across the room, alone. No money, no ring. Just a suit that didn't quite carry the weight it used to. He turned and stopped cold. Their eyes met. Savina didn't look away. She tilted her head slightly, acknowledging him, nothing more. Then turned back to Elias, touched his forearm lightly. Darian's chest rose once, then fell. He watched her laugh softly at something Elias whispered. Watched the way she nodded at people as if no part of her had ever been shattered. But she had been, and he had been the one to do it. Now he was watching the version of her he no longer had access to. She didn't walk over. She didn't flinch. She just existed, and that was louder than any confrontation. That was the closure, the redemption, the reckoning. He waited until she was alone. It didn't last long. She'd been surrounded all evening. Elias had just stepped aside to greet someone from the architectural firm sponsoring part of the event. Savina stood by the floral display near the marble staircase, her champagne untouched in her hand. Darian moved quickly. Savina. She turned slowly. Saw him. Didn't smile. Didn't tense. Darian. He looked thinner. His confidence dulled. Still wearing Holt Tower on his shoulders, like it mattered in a room where truth weighed more than money. "You look," he started. She cut in, gently. "Say something real, Darian." He nodded, then lowered his voice. "Are they mine?" There it was. The question that had sat on his chest for months. She didn't look around to see who might be listening. She didn't raise her voice. She just met his eyes. Biologically, yes. He exhaled, chest collapsing. Then came the harder part. Spiritually, she added, "You left that at Monet's doorstep." His jaw moved, but no words followed. Savina stepped closer, just enough for only him to hear. "You don't get to disappear and expect fatherhood to be waiting like a spare coat." He swallowed hard. "I want to see them, if they ask for you," she replied. "Not before." His brows pulled together. "Savina, no court," she said calmly. "No press, no threats. Just the truth." He stood there, powerless in a suit worth more than his apology. She took a sip of her champagne. "You know," she added, "for someone who spent years building an empire, you never learned how to protect anything that mattered." He flinched, but she wasn't angry. She was simply done. "I made mistakes," he whispered. "We all do," she replied, "but yours were rehearsed." Darian looked past her then, just for a moment. Saw Elias returning. Savina noticed. "He knows everything," she said, "and he still stayed." He didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. She turned to leave. He reached gently for her arm, fingertips only. She stopped, then looked down at his hand. "Don't." He dropped it. She walked away, each step quiet, final. Elias met her halfway, didn't ask what was said, just handed her a fresh glass of water, held her coat, took her hand, and the night went on. Darian remained by the staircase, still, alone, and finally, aware. The twins were asleep when they got home. Savina walked through the front door first, the hem of her gold gown brushing the hardwood floor. The house was quiet, calm. Moonlight spilled through the windows in thin silver lines. It felt like the world had finally gone still for her. Elias followed behind her, closing the door gently, hanging her coat before removing his own. Neither of them spoke, not because there was tension, but because silence had become sacred. She made her way down the hall, heels now in her hand, her bare feet soft against the floor. She paused at the nursery door and opened it slowly. Zaire was curled up, one hand tucked under his chin. Zayden had rolled to the side, his blanket twisted just below his knees, both breathing in perfect rhythm. Savina stepped inside. Elias didn't follow. He stayed by the doorway, watching her watch them. She lowered herself to her knees between the cribs, just for a moment, her gown pooling around her. She reached her hands between the slats, touching each boy's back, gently, reverently. They didn't stir. She closed her eyes. This was it. Not the gala, not the applause, not the whispered compliments from people who once pitied her silence. This, 2 boys, 1 future, built from the rubble she carried and the strength she refused to trade for rage. When she stood, She turned toward the doorway. Elias hadn't moved. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I'm full." He held out his hand. She walked to him, fingers laced. They moved back to the living room together. She sat on the edge of the sofa and leaned into him as he sat beside her. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then, he asked if they were his. "I figured," Elias replied. "I told him the truth." Elias looked at her, waiting. She met his eyes. "Biologically, yes. Spiritually, no." He nodded. "I meant it," she said. "I know. He doesn't get to be in their life just because he woke up lonely." "He won't be," Elias said, "unless they ask." She leaned into him harder now, her head resting on his chest. He placed a hand over her arm. "You think I'm doing this right?" she asked. "With grace, most people wouldn't even attempt." She smiled. "You think they'll be okay? With a mother like you?" He kissed her temple. "They already are." Outside, the wind had settled. Inside, so had she. Savina exhaled for the final time that night. Deep, slow, free. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this again," she whispered. This peace." Elias pulled her closer. "Then let it stay." And it did, not because of a man, not because of a win, but because she had walked through betrayal with her back straight, her mouth closed, and her heart still open. She didn't destroy what hurt her. She outgrew it. She didn't scream at the world. She rebuilt a smaller one, stronger, truer. And tonight, it was enough. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from betrayal, drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And if this story spoke to your soul, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell so you never miss a moment of healing, redemption, and the love you truly deserve. From all of us at Mr. Hearthline Stories, may your peace be louder than your pain.